Again, I'm very sorry my camera isn't working. I've been struggling with my computers today, but I'm here. My name is Tabitha, and I'm part of the Author Today team. I work at INASP together with Andy, and you might have seen my announcements on the MOOC about live sessions, and we're very happy to have you here today. Very excited about this session, and we're just going to be starting with some introductions. So actually, before we do the introductions, two minor housekeeping items. One is, please could you keep yourself muted while other people are speaking. So when the speaker is giving her talk, or when someone is asking a question, please keep yourselves muted to avoid distractions, and unmute yourself if you want to speak or ask a question. And we are recording the session so that you can watch it back later. So you should have seen that notification pop up on your screen as Andy pressed recording. And by attending the session, you're giving your consent to this being recorded. Just keep introducing yourselves in the chat, and I'll briefly hand over to Andy for a quick introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Tabitha. Welcome everyone. My name is Andy Nobes, and I'm the project manager of AuthorAid. We're really happy to see you here, both those of you who are part of the AuthorAid online course and other members of the NIHR network. Welcome.
Thank you, Andy. And now I'll briefly hand over to Hayley Mabelson, who's here from NIHR.
Hi, everybody. My name's Hayley Mabelson. I'm a senior program manager at the NIHR working in global health. Just here to really observe the course and hope that those of you that have been doing the MOOC are enjoying it, getting more out of it, and the wider group hope you enjoy the session today.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Okay, so now it's time for our speaker to be introduced. We have Jendebaya here. She is a research training and publication manager at the Center for Statistics and Medicine at Oxford University and in the Equator Network. And she is here to talk to you about writing a scientific manuscript on structure and style. And we have a 90-minute session lined up, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Do use the chat box for questions, as Jen will continuously be checking in on the chat if there are any questions. So do use that chat box, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tabitha. I'm just going to move a couple of things just so it's nice and easy for me. Right, folks. So lovely to be here and lovely to meet you all. As Tabitha said, I'm Jen. I'm from the UK Equator Centre. And just so you know how I've ended up here and chatting with you, I'm originally from South Africa. I moved to the UK to do a DPhil in biochemistry. So I've worked in the lab sciences and then later moved into copy editing. So working with manuscripts as an academic editor. And now with the UK Equator Centre, I am an academic writing trainer. So I spend a lot of time talking to people like yourselves about writing manuscripts. And I'm just going to make sure everything is where it needs to be. There we go. And the UK Equator Centre is part of the Equator Network. It's an international organization aiming to enhance the quality and transparency of health research by improving the quality of health research writing. And we do that because all of the research that you do is based on existing literature. So by improving how people write about their research today, we're ensuring better quality research tomorrow. And we do this in 3 ways. We raise awareness of these tools called reporting guidelines, which I'll talk about as we go through the session. We host a website filled with resources on academic writing, including all of the reporting guidelines available for human research. And we offer education and training, which is why I'm here today. And a huge thank you to Cancer Research UK, whose funding supports the UK Equator Centre's programme of research and training. And a couple of little extra housekeeping points to add on to what Tabitha mentioned. Folks sometimes ask for slides. What I'm going to be doing is preparing a handout for you that has all the main points that I'm going to mention. So we won't share slides, but you will have access to that. 2, interaction. An hour and a half is a long time for you to just listen to me natter on. That would be really boring. So what we're going to do is have lots of chat between us. So you have options. I've got the chat box open here and I can chat to you at any time. So please do put your questions on in there. And I think there's also the option for you to hop on the mic later on. As we're a fair few people, I think let's keep those for sort of set periods, but any questions as we go along, just let me know in the chat. I'll be reading it. And if there are any technical issues, do let us know in the chat. So apparently in a future webinar, you're going to be covering how to actually go about writing a scientific manuscript. But today, what we're going to talk about is the typical structure and style of a scientific manuscript so that you know what you're actually aiming for. We are focusing on research articles here, so not other things like commentaries or narrative reviews or things like that, but we can totally talk about those things in questions as we go about it. And just to check, can I have a quick yes, no, that people can actually see my slides okay? Quick yes in the chat that you can see my slides. Yes, excellent. Thanks, Ahmed. Right, so great, everyone can find the chat. Now, I have a question for you. Why are you all doing research? Why are you doing health research of any description? Or why are you planning to do health research? Why is that something you want to get involved with? Pop it in the chat if you can. Why are you getting involved in health research? Why do you want to do health research? So Ashish is saying to change government policies, excellent, and millions of people will benefit. Yeah. Sonali is saying to for our future careers and our interest in research. Yeah. Bule is saying to contribute to policy and change people's lives. Amazing. Totek is saying answering a question. Yeah. Julie, to improve our practice and the quality of our lives. Amazing. Ruben, to improve the health systems. Yes. Karen, I hope to be able to contribute to widening access to mental health care in South Asia. Fantastic. Ada, I like getting answers to puzzling questions as a medic. These answers border on health issues. Yes. Shri saying create new knowledge. Yes. Fabian, to contribute in finding answers to critical health questions and challenges. Yep. Dorothy, so the uneducated man can understand science from my research and explanations. Love it. Saraj, health is the ultimate wealth. Contribute to public health issues. Amazing. Simon, to answer questions through problem solving and improving access to healthcare and addressing real world scenarios. Yes. Christine, understand why some studies have failed in Uganda. Yes. Millard, getting answers to critical current changes. Love it. JMG, to create and recreate knowledge. Yes. Getahan, to build the well-being of the global health community. I love it. I love it. So these are really amazing, excellent reasons that you are all doing research. Fantastic. We've got a couple more coming through. So Fritri, to contribute to improving society and life. Julie, to solve our current health challenges. Love it. So you're all doing research for slightly different reasons, but at its core, all of you are doing research to change the world in some way. You want to change the way people think about something. You want to change maybe public policy, maybe how healthcare is delivered, but you want your research to be used by somebody to do something. That's why you're doing research. Those are really good reasons for doing research, which can be a hard thing to do. But the only way that our health research can improve lives, like you all want to do, is if it actually reaches people. And the way that happens is through the journal article. So the journal article is the only way that this amazing research that you do can have this initial impact. Yes, there's other things you can do. You can go out and talk to people, but you can only physically talk to so many people. That journal article is how you are disseminating your research out. So what does that mean a good journal article looks like? If that's the point of the journal article, to help you all achieve this amazing aim of changing the world, changing healthcare, what does a journal article need to be? What does it need to look like? What is a good journal article? Because we've got to know what's good to know what we're aiming for. We can't write something unless we know what we're aiming for. Let's see what folks say. Narcissus, it's got to be accessible. Ooh, love it. Totek, something that most people can understand. Yes. Sumira, leave some impact on the readers. Yes. Millard, clear, simple, useful. Yes. Got anything else? So you've got people can understand it, clear and simple. Liz Ismail, people can refer to or manage patients better. Yes. Ashish, open access. Ooh, Miriam, subject specific. Ganga, impact on community and policymakers. Yes. Ali, properly structured write-up. Yeah. Salmon, it's need to address the question with rigorous methodology and clear, concise findings communicated. Yes. Dorothy, a good journal article should be clear and understandable. Oh, and we've got a however in there. Excellent. We'll hang on for 2 secs. Ada, organized and targeted, yes. Krishipka, reputable, yes. Fitri, reliable, yes. Christine, smart, yes. Sonali, it should provide a clear message and inspiration to read. Amit wants it to be focused. Julie wants it to be accessible and simple. These are all really good things from a good journal article. Do the articles that you read do their job? Are the articles that you read like this? Are they simple? Are they clear? Do they communicate? Are they inspirational? Are they accessible? Are they like this? The average article that you read. Right. So Faith says mostly no. Andy says not always. Salmon to some extent. Totek, no. Ada says some, yep. Lizzie Ismail says mostly yes. Julie, some are not accessible, yep. So we've got some sometimes and some maybes and some yeses and some not always. So not every journal article is meeting these things that we think is a good idea, right? A lot of articles are unfortunately really formally written in a way that can be difficult for people to read. They can be difficult to read, and sometimes they are missing those crucial details. And we're not even talking about accessibility here, which is an excellent point. That idea of can you actually even get hold of it? That's, I think, a topic for another webinar. So what do we actually want? We want articles that readers can actually use. That's what readers need. They need articles that they can use. And I'm going to boil that down to three things. Something that they can easily read, something that they can easily understand, and something that has enough detail inside it for their particular use. And because it's nice to have little keywords, let's simplify that even further. We're going for simple, we're going for clear, we're going for complete. That's what the kind of journal article that will meet the actual purpose of a journal article is going to be: simple, clear, and complete. So as we're talking about the structure and style of an article, let's keep coming back to this point and keep coming back to what readers need. And let's test everything we're saying with, is it going to result in an article that is simple, clear, and complete, that it is actually usable by readers? Oh, and Fabian's made a good point in the chat. They're not, or sometimes articles are loaded with scientific jargon. Yes, and we will pick that up later on in the session. So just so I know where everybody is, in the chat, quickly pop in A, B, or C. What is your experience in preparing a manuscript? Are folks here starting right at their journey? They've not been involved. Have you been part of a team, or have you led some writing? So Totek's led the writing, so we've got one C. There's Ismail, we've got a B, B and C. Seeing lots of Bs coming through now. Yep, Bs and Cs so far. Mainly Bs and Cs, probably about an even split between Bs and Cs coming through. So folks have been involved in a writing team, or folks have led the writing. Oh, and there's a couple of people coming through with no experience, which is amazing. You're starting out in your journey. Really lovely to be part of this with you right at the beginning of your journey. Fantastic. Okay, so hopefully we're going to be able to help all of you. So for those of you who are starting right at the beginning of your journey, excellent that you're going to get that sort of solid foundation before you even start. Those of you who've been involved in a team, maybe you're thinking about leading an article the next time, and we're going to give you sort of some basis of that. And those of you who've led the writing, it would be lovely to hear from you as well, talking from your experience as we go along, what's worked, what's not, and how you've experienced these sorts of topics as we go through. So thank you so much for sharing, everybody. Really nice to see that we've got a nice wide range of experience. So we're going to talk about the structure of a journal article to start with, and we're going to talk about a typical journal article. Now, your target journal will usually have some guidelines on the headings that they'd like you to use in your article for the particular study design that you're using. And it's always a good idea to check that target journal before you start to write. But most are going to follow a fairly similar structure. And this is something that I think a lot of you will know already. They'll start with an abstract, a summary, they'll have an introduction, methods, results, discussion, and then at the end, there's some statements about the article as well. And that's called the IMRAD structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion, IMRAD. So let's dig into each of those very briefly. We're going to spend about 5 minutes on each of those sections. The abstract. So an abstract can be structured with subheadings or unstructured. It doesn't matter whether it's structured or unstructured, it's covering the same information either way. But you normally have got between 150 and 500 words, depending on the journal. Most medical journals are going to hit out around 250 to 300, but there's some that go all the way down to 100. It needs to summarize your entire paper, your entire article message. You're going to cover what don't we know, a bit of background. What have you actually done? What have you tried? The methods. What have you found so far? What have you found? Which is the results, what these findings mean, the discussion or the conclusion, and a little bit about why perhaps it matters. Sometimes can fit in there too. The most important things to think about for abstracts is that an abstract should only contain the information and ideas that are already in your main text. So the abstract can't have any new information that is not in the main text. And the other thing is that it has to agree perfectly with the main text. So the abstract has to agree with things like significant figures for numbers or general conclusions. Those should agree perfectly. The reality is that the abstract is very often the only thing that your reader can see from your article. We had a couple of folks talking about accessibility. When articles are published behind a paywall, folks only get a hold of the abstract to be able to decide, do they want to buy your article, to read through further, or even to get conclusions and decide if they're going to start doing things with patients based on your research. So it's absolutely critical that an abstract fairly and transparently reflects what is in the main text. And I'll talk a little bit later about how to know what information to put into the abstract. So you've got your abstract. The next section that folks have to read through is your introduction. And that covers the big key question, what don't we know? That's what it's going to answer. And also a little bit about why the study is happening, why it matters. So in general, an introduction is made up of 4 sections. Section 1 is a general overview of the academic area. You're going to cite a few big key papers here, and you're going to tell us where we are in health research and why it is important. And this is generally 1 paragraph. And that's the big difference. A lot of folks will put in a lot, 1 paragraph. The next section shows the evidence gap or problem. Again, it's about a paragraph, and it goes from the broad academic area that you've identified, and it narrows down to reach the gap. So it's narrowing your focus because you can't discuss everything in an academic area. But it also needs to give enough detail for the gap or the problem or the debate to be clear for the reader. And you might need to critically discuss the literature here. How good is the existing evidence? How good are the existing methods? Because that might be why there's a gap. The third section of the introduction hones in on which bit of the evidence gap you are tackling in your research. It's your research question or hypothesis, and it's usually 1 paragraph or a half a paragraph. It's not the whole evidence gap. You can't answer the whole evidence gap in 1 research question. It needs to be an answerable research question or a hypothesis or a defined piece of the gap. And then the final section is how you planned to fill that evidence gap or answer your question. So you might give your overall study design that you use to answer the question. You might give the aims and objectives of your work. And this is, again, either the same paragraph or part of the previous one. In some areas, you would also give a summary highlight of the results that you're going to find. This is not common in health research, but if you are working sort of on the line between health research and sort of the life sciences, you might find that that's the established in sort of how it's done in your field, is that your last sentence of the introduction will kind of say overall what you found. So have a look at papers in your field. A couple of tips for introductions. Length. Which should be longer, introduction or discussion? Faith, how will the structure work for a protocol paper? Very similar. Protocol papers still need to have an introduction. So Ashish is saying discussion, Gabby's saying discussion, Miriam's discussion. Yep, discussion, 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 discussion. Everybody agrees the discussion should be longer, right? Rather spend your words on your discussion. Don't spend the words in the introduction. And often you'll find papers where the introduction goes on and on and on for like 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs. And then the discussion ends up being quite squeezed because they've run out of words. Introduction, get to the point as quickly as possible. The discussion is where we can really start playing with that literature. Second tip, the introduction is not a whole literature review, right? You're not trying to cite every single paper ever written on your topic here. It's just enough for us to understand this study and why it's happening. And it doesn't need to go back to the very beginning of your field. It's not a history lesson, just enough us to understand this research topic. So that's the introduction. Next, we have the methods. So the methods is the recipe for your study. It's the recipe for your study. You want to give your reader enough detail so that they could actually repeat your study on their own. And that starts telling us a little bit about how much we need to explain. How much do we need to give that somebody could actually copy my study? And I also want to give my readers enough detail so that they can judge the quality of my study, that they can judge how much they trust my results, and they can judge where my results could be applied. Is it only just in my narrow little area? Is it slightly more widely applicable? They can only tell that if I've given them an adequate explanation of my methods. So how do I know how much detail? Great. First off, I do need to report every single aspect of the study design. So you'll often see papers that have gaps. They'll describe their intervention really well, but they won't mention sample size, or they won't mention their statistical analysis. So talk about every aspect. Where does your data come from? How did you recruit your patients or find your papers or get access to this data set? How did you interact with those things? How did you get your measurements? How did you analyze your data? And then every step in between. And a good way of testing this is, have you gone into the same level of detail in every single one of these aspects? Have you gone into lots of detail on one and less on another? Have a think about whether somebody who didn't do the study with you could actually use this information to try and repeat the study. How do I know what's good information? If it matters, the piece of information matters, put it in. So if it matters that the pot is stirred 3 times counterclockwise at midnight, write that down. If all you need to say is stirred and that won't change the result, just say stirred. So would this piece of information change the way somebody does the study and get what result they get? Give them that information. And aspects includes materials. What software did you use? What version? Which equipment did you use? Which MRI machine? Which centrifuge? Where did you get your tissues or your cells or your plasmids or your people? Where did you get your data sets? Every single element, try and go into that level of detail. As you're writing about your methods, try and avoid sneaking results in. So methods is anything you know before you do the study. Results is anything you know after you do the study. So which of these 3 sentences is methods and which is results? So sentence 1, people aged 18 through 65 years were eligible for the study. 2, we recruited 40 people. 3, they had a mean age of 36 years. So what's methods and what's results? So I think people are putting in what they think is methods. So sentence 2 and sentence 1 are coming in as methods. Oh, and Faith is saying sentence 1 is results. Simon saying sentence 3 is results. Boule saying 1, Karen saying 1. I'm assuming that's for methods. Dorothy saying methods are 1 and 2. Yeah, so what are the things that I knew before I did the study? Yeah, so 1 and 2 methods. Yep, 1 and 2 are methods. Exactly. 3 is results. Yes, that's what's coming in from folks. Great. So things I knew before I did the study. I know my eligibility criteria. I set them before I start my study. So if I say I'm only going to recruit people 18 through 65 years, great. I'm only going to know how many people I actually recruited, and I'm only going to know their mean age after I've done the study, after I've recruited. So that's a result. And that's a very common one that you see sneaking into methods. So keep methods in methods, keep results in results. The other thing to think about is justifications of methods. Try and keep the justifications of methods, the explanations, in the discussion. So what I did, I maybe couldn't blind my participants, but I did blind my assessors. That's methods. The fact that I couldn't possibly create a placebo and that bias was minimized in these lots of different ways, that's a justification. Keep that for the discussion section. So that's our methods section. Next up, results, which is, what did you find? It can be helpful to have the results follow the same flow as the method so that every method has a matching result. So have those two mirror each other in structure. Check the instructions for authors for whether to show figures and tables in their manuscript position or at the end of the document or as separate files, and any other instructions. There's some really good instructions on what they want for figures and tables. And for with results, we've got three options, right? And those three options are tables, figures, and text. It's pretty much our three options. How are you going to present each result? You generally won't repeat the same data point in both a figure and a table. And you won't have a table and then repeat every data point again in the text. That's pointless. But you might show the same result in two ways. For instance, where you have a table that shows a full result, and then you have an image that shows, say, a representative patient or a representative cell. So you might have two images or two ways of showing the same picture or the same part of the study, but you're not going to show the same data points over and over in the same way. So you've got to kind of work out what is the best way for me to present this particular thing that I'm trying to show. Figures and tables should be referenced and integrated into the text. But again, don't just repeat all of that information. So you don't just want a figure or table floating. They always need to have a figure one shows, table one shows in the text. You do want your results to give the full story. This is part of that. Are we being really transparent in what we're doing? We don't want to cherry pick results. We don't want to just go, this is the shiny result. This is the one I'll show. I'm not going to show the rest of them, right? We want to try and give a clear and complete picture of your results. That doesn't mean you have to give every single tiny thing you did, possibly. Maybe that doesn't work for your story, but you don't want to hide anything. So you want to talk about both successes and failures because other folks will learn from them. You want to talk about both your positive and your negative results. If you set up a study and we're collecting 6 outcomes from your patients, and one of those outcomes had your interaction had a significant effect on, and 5 of them they had an insignificant effect on, you still want to put all 6 outcomes in your paper because otherwise people can't fully understand your work. Sometimes folks can be very nervous about negative results and go like, oh, but journals won't take them. That's not true. It turns out that that's all to do with us not submitting the papers with the negative result in them. And sometimes negative result papers can be the most important. So don't feel like you have to hide those away. Put them in your papers. Try and avoid interpretation in the results. Which of these statements do you think is results and which is discussion? So 1, all the green things grew. 2, all the red things didn't grow. And 3, green promotes growth through the rainbow pathway. Which is results and which is discussion? So you've got 1 and 2 results, 3 is discussion, 1 and 2 is results. Yeah, just letting a few more of those come through. So 1 and 2 results, 3 is a discussion. Exactly. So if I look at the results, the thing I can see is the green things grew and the red things didn't. And that's a nice way of summarizing a bunch of data points from a table into the text. But what it actually means and why I think it's happened, that's discussion. So I'll save that for discussion. And then just a couple of quick things about figures and tables. You shouldn't need the text to understand the figure or table. They need to include a clear, complete standalone caption that sits below figures or above tables. You should include an explanation of every single symbol or abbreviation, either in the caption or in the legend for a figure or in the notes for a table, every single abbreviation or acronym. And a good figure or table is as clear as possible. So look at every element and line that you've added and ask yourself, is it needed? And if it is it clear? So let's have a play. How would you all improve this figure that's on the screen? It's not the best figure in the world. What might you do? So Ruben's saying label the axes. Yeah. Ada's saying change the gradings to reduce the lines. Yep, there's a lot of lines. Samira is saying it's not labeled. Yep. Miriam, remove the horizontal lines in the graph and label the axes. Yep. Karen also labeling the axes. Catherine adding units. Yep, there's no units on there either. Dorothy saying the grid lines are confusing. Yep, there's just too many of them. Ali wants labels. Yep. Anything else that folks are looking at? Ganja saying the source is missing. So with a figure, you'd assume that this is a figure in a paper. This is my figure, so I don't need to say which paper it's come from because it's mine. Raheli is labeled axis. Yes. Anything else? Gabby saying shorten the title to the figure. It's too lengthy. So actually, having a nice long caption is a good thing for a figure or a table. You want to have it be standalone. So actually, feel free to use as many words as you need to make sure that it is understandable where this figure comes from. Yeah. Ashish, legend should have the actual color and no grid lines. Sonali, the colors could be mismatching. We're going to have a play with those colors in a minute. Yeah. So let's have a play. These are all some really lovely suggestions. The one thing people haven't mentioned at the moment, oh, and Ahmad, the max unit of the axes should be extended. Yes, right? It should match up to where the line goes to. Min saying the title's not specific. So Min, let's zero in on that for a second. Why is there a title? Figures should have captions at the bottom. Excel does this thing, if anyone's doing their figures in Excel, it does this thing where it pops a random little title at the top of the figure as well. And in fact, other graphing software does the same. Do we need it? No, because we have a proper caption. It says figure 1, change in writing speed with regular and irregular writing. So we don't need it. It can go away. We've also taken away those grid lines that people were saying there's too many of them. So that's much better. Something that folks haven't mentioned yet, those teeny tiny x-axis labels. Oh yes, Sarja's just mentioned it. The font size isn't uniform in the two axes. Yeah, you want people to be able to actually read what's going on. So let's boost that up and make it the right size. That's much better. And then lots of you were mentioning there's no labels on the axes. You're completely correct. And also there's no units on the axes. You're completely correct. So I've got words per hour and I've got Wixarit. Are you happy with those? Do you like them? Yep, yep. Asima, good point. We'll pick that up in a second. So it's much better. Do you know what Wixarit means in the x-axis for the unit? Dorothy is saying the unit for the time doesn't sound so good. Yes. So this is something that happens quite often. We use short little code versions of our the names of our variables in our own data sets. And then sometimes we forget to turn them into like proper words when we get to our figures and tables. So it's a good idea to go through and check, do they actually say what they really are and not just the odd shorthand that we're using in our group. So weeks of writing, write it out in full. So now it's a bit easier to do it. And then it's also been mentioned actually having our axis bars go as far as our data points actually go. So that's much better. This is still not a perfect figure. Obviously, we could do lots more with it, but let's take a moment now. Somebody's already mentioned, I've forgotten who now. Somebody mentioned color blindness, and you're quite correct. When you're choosing colors, you do need to consider color blindness. And one of the ways to do that is to print your images in grayscale to see if somebody with a form of color blindness will actually be able to see the different between the different elements. It's also useful for anyone who doesn't have access to a color printer, which is an awful lot of us. So a good rule of thumb is to use symbols, line weights, or shade, as well as color to show difference. And just in general, never use bright red and green next to each other. That's virtually impossible for people to tell the difference between. So here I've used blue and I've used pink. But these two are basically the same color in gray. They've got the same amount of color in them. So what I could do, and I've said blue and pink in the figure caption. So I have explained them, but it's not a useful explanation for somebody colorblind. So what I could do is make one of them dotty and one of them solid. And then in the caption, I've said blue dotted and pink solid. Now it doesn't matter whether you can see the solid or whether you can see the colors. you can still see tell the difference between the two lines. Or I could use different grays, one dark and one light, and say dark and light in the caption. Or I could use a blue and a pink. And then rather than say dark blue and light pink in the caption, I just have the two lines next to each other in an actual legend, where it now says regular writing and irregular writing. So that's another way of doing it. Okay. And then get on suggesting vertical lines on each week of writing. And that's one of those things that you can play around with. Some people like vertical lines, some people don't, and it's worth having a play with. I mean, really what you would like to see here is actual data points rather than just a straight line. That would also be nice to see. So here, those are just a couple of things to think about with results. How about the discussion? We're getting to the end of the structure. So the discussion should mirror the introductions structure because it's also 4 sections. The first section summarizes your results. It tends to be sort of a short section, paragraph or 2. It doesn't repeat every single result or number, but it kind of summarizes the big key findings or steps that have been accomplished. The next section, which is often the longest, puts the results into context. And here's where you cite a lot of literature. You compare your results with the literature and your expectations. What is expected? What is unexpected about each result? And why? How do these results change our understanding of anything? What should change in the world as a result of these results? And are there any new research avenues suggested by these results? And these 4 moves happen repeatedly. So you pick one result or group of results, compare with the literature, expected or unexpected, change in understanding, future research, and then start again with another result or group of results. So this happens a few times through the discussion. Then the third section is another long one, reflection. Here's where you're going to dig into your decisions in planning and doing your work. And you might also cite a lot of literature here. So you're going to reflect on each decision you made and why. Are there things that you would have liked to have done differently, but you couldn't? What are the reasons? What did you do to try and mitigate those issues? What would you have changed if you could do the study again? What did you do that was really clever or really sensible to make your results even more valid and generalizable? What is this section traditionally called? What do we call this in journal articles? There's normally a little heading. Yep, Samira and Matthias, limitations. It's called strengths and limitations. I didn't just say strengths and limitations because when people hear strengths and limitations, oh, we've got somebody who's not muted. When people hear strengths and limitations, they rattle off a list of them and they go, the study has several limitations. 1, X, 2, Y, Z, Z. And they say things like 1, it was a small study size. 2, it was an observational study. 3, it was this. That's not reflecting. So keep digging into each of those elements and asking why. Is this really a small study? And if it is a small study, what do we mean by small? And how has that actually affected your results? Observational research is a completely valid and useful type of research. Is it really the fact that it's an observational research a limitation? Or was this exactly the correct study design for what you are trying to do? So don't just write individual sentences. You want to see at least a full long sentence or a couple of sentences for each of those limitations and strengths. Why is it a limitation? Why is it a strength? And then your last paragraph is a conclusion. And sometimes a journal will ask you to have actually the heading conclusion, sometimes not, but one paragraph that summarizes the whole story of your paper, includes the key findings and what they mean and their value. And a couple of things to think about. No new information. If it isn't in the results, it shouldn't be in the discussion. Give the full story. If there are papers that agree with your results and other papers that disagree, which ones would you cite? Which ones would you cite? There's papers that agree with your results and other ones that disagree. Which ones would you cite? C. Excellent, right? We're going to cite all of them. Why? Because it is showing your peer reviewers that you actually know the literature. And also it's way more interesting, right? The fact that everybody would agree with you. We haven't learned anything then. Where is there the interesting tension? Tell us about it. Talk about literature that both agrees and disagrees with you, if it exists. If it doesn't, that's fine. And avoid spin. So spin is using language to change how people view a result, to make a negative result sound not so bad, or a positive result sound even better than it really is? Can anybody give me some examples of spin in the comment box where you've seen words used to make a negative result sound not negative or positive result sound really amazing? So Doris is saying the compound did not have much activity, but it's much better than so-and-so. Oh, yes. Unless there's a reason for that, it sounds spinny. Shall I give you all some examples? So you heard people talk about perfect associations between two things. There's no such thing as a perfect association, right? It can be a strong association, but it's probably not perfect. When people talk about paradigm shifting results, right? A paradigm shift is supposed to come once in a generation, not in every single paper. That's when we take a nice result and people are like, oh, no, it's the best result ever and it's going to change the world. It might not change the world, it's going to change your area of research. Let's be realistic in what we state. But also when people take a negative result, they're like, oh, but it's trending towards significant. It's not significant, but it's trending towards significant. A single number can't trend anywhere. It's almost significant. We don't need to use language like that. It's not necessary. Kushipa, phrases like the findings suggest that, that's not spin, that's totally fine. The findings can suggest something, that's completely great. Ada, the intervention worked in a small setting, but is presented as a game changer. Exactly. That's when we go way too far in the other direction. Sarah, if a particular risk factor did not show any association, but other associations can be made. I'm not sure I entirely follow, but yeah, if they're pretending, if you're kind of making it sound like there's more of a result than there really is, that's spin. And we want to avoid all of that. It's really not necessary. Let the result stand on its own. Narcissus using words like proves when something's significant. Yes, we want to be quite careful with that. Have we really proved beyond all reasonable doubt something? And then when something's not significant, talking about clearly observing trends. Yes, if it isn't a real thing, we want to be careful about the language that we're using. So that's discussions. And our last little section on structure is things that happen at the end. A lot of journals will ask you to add some additional sections. They might ask for a plain language summary in an easy to read language for patients. They might ask you for authorship contributions. They might ask you for an acknowledgement section for the people who don't meet authorship criteria, funding sources, maybe a statement about whether and how data from the study will be shared, or even conflicts of interest. So those are all things that your journal will tell you exactly which statements they'd like to see at the end of the paper. So that's the structure. These are all the elements that belong in the structure. Does anybody have some questions? We take about 5 minutes now for questions about article structure before we move on to style. If there were any questions that I missed as we went along. And we'll also have time to ask more questions at the end. Ahmed, papers that combine results and discussion, that's completely fine. There are a lot of fields where they'll do a results and discussion section. I do think it's a little bit easier to split them apart because it becomes more obvious what is result, things that actually happened, versus discussion, things that are basically my opinion and my interpretation of the results. So it's quite nice to separate those out into the two things. It makes it very clear for the reader what is my opinion or my interpretation and what is the things I actually saw. Yeah. But if your journal asks for that structure, that's completely fine. Just try and signpost really clearly what is results and what is where you are making your opinions. Sonali, the structure for qualitative research. So most qualitative studies will follow a very similar structure. The main difference is that in the method section, there might be a little bit more about sort of the reflections on the author, sort of like how the author's perspective can influence the paper. And you might have an additional section talking in your introduction about the framework that you're working within, which in quant research, we're all working from the same framework to an extent. So working on framework would come in there. Samira, ethical considerations. So in terms of ethical considerations, do you mean you need to state whether you've gotten ethical consent, whether you had ethical consent? If that's true, if you had the kind of research that needed to go for ethics, you do need a statement in the method section to say, we went to ethics and our sort of ethical approval number is, our study number is. Kushibka, qualitative research has lots of detail. How do you say what's important? That's true of all study designs. And if you give me 1 second in the next section, I'll help you with an idea for that. Samira, consent. So Samira, that would fall under methods, and it's an element of methods. How did you obtain consent? That's one of those steps we've talked about in methods, every single step that you went through, include every single step. And again, making sure you don't forget anything. We'll talk about that in a moment. Fantastic. Thank you for your questions, everybody. I think it's going to be useful if we move to the next section because quite a few of the questions are linking into the same idea. So we can pick up again at the end on more of your questions. Miriam, really great question. What is if your paper is an extension of another one? It's like the data source and the design is the same. Do you rewrite the methodology in much detail or refer to the previous paper? You have a balance to strike there. So on the one hand, you've got it all somewhere else and you could just say, I'm doing X, like with so. Quite often you'll have a study which reuses a data set and you'll say, well, the data is coming from there. But on the other hand, does everybody have access to that other paper? And is everybody going to go to that other paper and read it in enough detail? So it's a good idea to give people a nice summary. A lot of folks will write protocol papers as well, and they've got exactly the same issue. I've written a protocol paper. It described in great detail how I'm going to do the study. But I still want to give a nice summary of the information in the main paper or in this paper. So you're finding a balance there where you're maybe not going to give quite that same level of detail, but you are going to give people enough that if they just read what you've written there, they can understand your paper. So you want enough that they can they don't have to go and read another paper to understand yours. Maybe there wasn't enough for them to physically copy it, but they can understand it. Right. You're welcome. Okay. So let's play with style next, because I think that's going to be helpful for what we're going to talk about, what folks have been asking. Because first we're going to talk about that idea of completeness. How do I make sure I've given enough detail that everybody needs? How do I pick? There's so much about my study. How do I pick? We'll talk a little bit about scientific language requirements, ending up with a clear paper and ending up with a simple paper, linking back to those ideas of simple, clear, and complete. So a lot of the things I'm going to say in this section are suggestions, not rules. The main thing is to become deliberate about our choice of language. So completeness. How do we make sure that we've added every detail that each of our readers need? How do we know? Really tricky. There are some handy dandy guides out there. So reporting guidelines are reminders of the minimum information that readers need to fully understand your study. They tend to be given as checklists or as structured text that list the information. And you can see on the screen here the first page of Consort, the reporting guideline for clinical trials. It is just a list of information that's needed. Here you can see it goes methods, trial design, participants, interventions, outcome, sample size, randomization, right? It's going way beyond the usual IMRAD outline of introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So here's item 4 on participants. It's asking for 2 pieces of information, eligibility criteria, and settings and location where the data were collected. And that's just one of those many methods items. So they tend to focus reporting guidelines on methods and results. There's a little bit on intro and discussion, but very little. It's mainly about methods and results. You've got big general reporting guidelines that cover the whole research article for particular study designs. And there's one for each of the big study design. So for QALY, there's SRQR, and there's also the JARS guidelines as well. But for all of the rest of the study designs, there's loads because folks have mentioned QALY. There's also guidelines that extend these general guidelines for particular subdesigns or clinical areas. So they still cover the whole paper. But for instance, we have CONSORT for clinical trials, but then we have lots of extensions of CONSORT, for instance, for trials of social and psychological interventions. So there's lots of extensions that take it for your particular field. And then there's reporting guidelines for specific areas of the article. And I said to you, abstracts, that will get you some help as to what detail to put into your abstract. There are reporting guidelines specifically for abstracts, like there's CONSORT for abstracts, STROBE for abstracts, which is for observational research, PRISMA for abstracts, for systematic reviews. There's lots of them out there. So really quickly, has anyone heard of reporting guidelines before and or used reporting guidelines? Ivan, for implementation research, trying to think what would be you've got SQUIRE, which is quality improvement research, which might be helpful. So we've heard, oh, Gettin's used them, Miriam's used them, fantastic. Which ones have you used? Karen's used PRISMA for systematic reviews. That's a very common one, great. Sonali's heard of them, but not used them yet, fantastic. Faith's also used PRISMA for systematic reviews, fantastic. Gabby's also used PRISMA, Salmon's used PRISMA. PRISMA tends to be the one people come across first, which is great. As you're moving into other study designs, have a look for other reporting guidelines. Oh, cool, so Akinyemi has used STROBE for observational research. Zainab's also used PRISMA, Ivan's used PRISMA, CONSORT and STROBE. So 3 of the big ones, fabulous, fabulous. Kashipa's also used PRISMA. Excellent. So for those of you who are just new to this, your target journal's instructions usually mentions reporting guidelines, and they'll tell you which reporting guideline they expect for which study design, which is really helpful. And if they just say, you visit Equator Network's website, we're here to help you. Come along to the website. We have a whole collection of all the reporting guidelines. We've got an easy search function to help you find them, and you can search by study design and clinical area. So that's completeness. And once we've got all the detail that we need, now we can start focusing on style for our last half an hour. So scientific language conventions. There are conventions in our field. So there are some rules of scientific language, but those rules don't mean that we can't communicate clearly, even if a lot of the articles we read don't. It is possible. So we're going to have a quick chat about structure, tense, and voice. So the basic ingredients or structure of writing, we've got paragraphs, sentences, and words. Focusing on paragraphs, paragraphs is a collection of sentences that covers one theme. So these are the sentences that belong together more than any other sentences in the piece. They're best friends. There's no fixed rule for how long a paragraph should be, but each paragraph should have one major theme. You don't want lots of really long paragraphs. They get very tricky to read. You've heard people talk about the wall of text. The white space between paragraphs gives people's eyes a break. It's really important. Similarly, you don't want lots of really short 1-sentence or 2-sentence paragraphs, because you start sounding like a newspaper article. So to the ear, it sounds a little bit informal or not scientific. So we want a little bit of depth to our paragraphs as well. But also, you don't have to have them all be the same length. You can play around with it. Having one longer paragraph and maybe a really short paragraph for punchiness can work really well. But if you're ever looking at your page and you realize there is no paragraphing in this whole page, you probably need another paragraph. That's not all one theme. Press enter. The paragraphs are made up of sentences, and a sentence is a collection of words that at minimum has a verb, which is a doing word, and it can have a subject, which is doing the doing, and an object, which is experiencing the doing. And sentences can get really long and complicated. We add phrases and clauses, and they get longer and longer and longer. But each sentence should actually just contain one idea, or it gets too long for your reader. How do you know you're getting too long? A good idea is to try reading your sentence out loud. Can you remember what the beginning of the sentence said by the time you get to the end of the sentence? And how often did you need to breathe in the middle? That's a good idea of, oh, this thing is getting quite long. I've needed to take like a run out of breath towards the middle. And it's not easy to remember by the time I get to the end what I meant at the beginning. Maybe there's more than one idea in that sentence and I should split it up. So we're going to have a play. We have a sentence to play with over the next half an hour. This is a grammatically correct sentence. but it's maybe not particularly nice to read. Once the study nurses had been trained, each of the 5 sites commenced recruitment and aimed to initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1-month period, where failure to achieve this would result in the receipt of additional training. What do you think about the length of that sentence? I definitely needed a breath in the middle. Samira says too long. Bule is saying too long. Ganja's also saying too long. Faith, yep, everyone's saying it's too long. Right, I agree with you. It's too long. Miriam's going for way too long. Yeah. Where would you cut it? What are the places where you think actually that would have been a good place to cut it? Ganja's saying the idea is not clear. Yeah, there's too many ideas. Bule is saying it could be 3 sentences. Sorry, Bule said boucle. So Miriam's also saying 3 sentences. Where would you cut? Where would you put your full stops? Anyone had some ideas on where they'd put a full stop? So Karen would do after recruitment. So before the and, yep. Kai is saying once the study nurses commenced recruitment, yep. Narcissus is saying where the commas are, yep. Cyril's saying cut it at recruitment and start again from there, yep. So folks are saying recruitment and is a good place. And the other one, Salmon's saying after month period, yep, within a 1-month period where that comma is. So Ada's saying a period after the word, a period after the word period, but Samira is saying after period, excellent. Excellent, great. So there are 3 places you could cut this. I'm being a little excessive. You maybe wouldn't want to go all the way to this many sentences, but it is a way to see all of the places one could cut. All of the places where you see a comma are places where it could be cut. And all of the places where you see joining words, conjunctions like and, they're also basically punctuation. So we've got comma each and comma where. Those are all of the places where it would make sense to cut it if we wanted that many sentences. And so for now, we are going to make all of those individual sentences. And we'll see later if we think it's a good idea. So what we've got now is the study nurses were trained. Each of the 5 sites then commenced recruitment. They aimed to initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1-month period. Failure to achieve this would result in the receipt of additional training. Was that easier to listen to? It's the same number of words. I've barely edited that to make them work as sentences, but is it easier to listen to? Got a couple of yeses coming through. It's weird, isn't it? Because it's the same amount of information, and it's the same number of words, and it's still not written particularly nicely. I've still got all the horrible language, but it's easier for us to follow the ideas. Those full stops give our ears and our brains a break. They tell us, I can stop holding the whole thing in my head and start again. So that's why those full stops are really helpful. Right. Okay. We'll come back to this because it's still not fantastic. We can do some things to make it better. That was our structure. How about tense? There are some clear rules for scientific writing under tense. So anything that's generally known should be in the present tense. What do we mean by that? The sky is blue. Generally known fact, sky is blue is present tense. Anything that has been discovered by a specific study should be in the past tense. So smart people found that the sky was blue. They did an experiment and they found the sky was blue. Found was past tense. Specific studies include your study. So we repeated what the smart people did, our methods, past tense. We also found that the sky was blue, our results, past tense. We can also use future tense to talk about things that we plan to do, such as in your proposals, right? Or in your research projects, proposals, or in your future methods, future research sections, or your grant proposals. We will repeat the smart people experiment, future tense. It is important to check in your methods sections. If you wrote a grant application or a proposal, and then you copy pasted chunks of text into your methods for your results paper, check the tense, because quite often things go a little bit funny. What do we mean by that? What is the tense of this paragraph? What are we seeing? Future, past, present. Samira Salmon saying past. Ruthless saying past. Yep, right. It's past tense. This is methods, right? It's past tense. It's the results of this. It's the methods of a specific study. Perfect. What about this section here? Failure to achieve this would result in the receipt of additional training. What happened there? Is that past tense? Something's gone a bit odd. So folks are saying that's future tense, right? It's kind of future tense. It's past perfect tense. Something's gone wrong there. What happened there? What was that sentence originally? Can anyone work on what that would result used to say before I copy pasted it from my protocol? What did I do wrong when I copy pasted it from my protocol and I tried to change it into past tense? What did it used to say? Karen saying will. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I did wrong. Yeah, Ahmed. Yeah, and Faith. So it used to say will result. And then I copy pasted it and it said will result. And instead of saying resulted, as a few people are saying, I changed the will into would. So I need to delete the will and just say resulted. We know what happened. Failure to achieve this resulted in the receipt of additional training. It's a very minor thing, but it saves a word every time you fix it. And I don't know about you all, but I find most of the team who send me things to edit are always over word count. That's the number one thing they're asking me to do. So any place where we can save a couple of words, fantastic. We thought about tense. How about voice? There are two voices in English. In active voice, the subject acts. In passive voice, the subject is acted upon, is acted on. In academic writing, we have very often used passive voice. That was sort of the traditional thing that was used in academic writing, but we've moved away from using passive voice, and a lot more journals are asking you for active voice these days. And that's because there is a slight problem with passive voice. Not a problem in such, but it allows us to make an error without noticing. This is a passive voice sentence. The dog was walked on Saturday. What's your question? What's missing? The dog was walked on Saturday. Who walked the dog? By who or what? Who walked the dog, right? That's the problem with passive voice, is it lets us say what happened without saying who did it. And particularly in health research, that can be problematic. Jane walked the dog on Saturday. I can't say active voice without saying who did the work. And for us in health research, it can be very important to say who did things. It matters to us whether a patient reported their pain or whether some healthcare professional watched the patient and wrote down what they thought their pain score was. It matters to us who is doing things. It also makes us center ourselves on our patients a lot of the time, on our research participants. So it can be really helpful to think, I don't have to switch to active voice to be able to say these things. I could quite happily have said, the dog was walked on Saturday by Jane, or the dog was walked by Jane on Saturday. Active or passive voice. It's just that passive voice lets us get away with not saying it. So when you are using passive voice, have a look and see, am I hiding somebody who should be mentioned? Not always. Sometimes it's a whole trial team doing everything or a whole study team doing things, and we don't need to say who did things. But it is important to think, am I hiding somebody who should be mentioned? No? Okay, fine. Think about it and be deliberate. Remember, we were trying to be deliberate about our word choices. So if we look here, we have passive voice in our first sentence. The study nurses were trained. It's a complete sentence, but we haven't said who did the training. And maybe it does matter to you who did the training. Maybe it matters whether it's a third party or whether it's the trial team. So let's put in that information. The study nurses were trained by the trial team. Now that that information is in there, what do you think? Active or passive? Which is better? And if somebody wants to write down how would you turn it into active voice? So the study nurses were trained by the trial team, passive voice. How would you switch that to active voice? So a few people are saying that active would be better here. Yeah. How would you write it as active? Ivan's suggesting Grammarly. I would avoid programs like that entirely. Write it yourself. It's much better to get comfortable with language in your own voice. So the trial team trained the study nurses. Yeah, the trial team trained the study nurses. Now, whether one is better than the other is completely debatable. If the whole of the rest of the paragraph was using the study nurses as the subject, so if the paragraph had gone on, the study nurses were trained by the trial team, the study nurses then did this, and the study nurses did that, and the study nurses did this, I would leave it in passive voice because I'd be keeping the same subject the whole way through the paragraph. But the next sentence isn't about the study nurses. So in that case, I'd probably switch to active voice because I save 2 words. If you are saying who did the thing in a passive voice, it gains 2 words. So I'd switch to active. So there's no right or wrong. This is completely preference. But in that instance, I probably would switch to active. So this is active. Trial team trained the study nurses. The study nurses were trained by the trial team that were trained by construction. That's passive. Active, the trial team trained the study nurses. So those were the language things. How about clarity? Now, our issue here is that readers don't have us sitting next to them to ask a question. So we want there to never be a place where they go, oh, I don't quite know what's happening here. So we'll talk about subjects, pronouns, comparisons, and verbs. Subjects. I finished writing the first draft of my article on the day the article was due. This is not an advisable writing practice. Where's the ambiguity here? Can you spot the ambiguity, the thing that is not clear? What's the ambiguous word? Can you spot the one word? So Cyril's wondering about the word article. Samira's, but when was the article due? When's it due? Narcissus is saying this. Yeah. Why do we think the word this is ambiguous? What do I mean by the word this? I'd say to you, I mean the whole previous sentence. Of course, I mean the whole previous sentence. No, I don't. I mean an interpretation of the previous sentence, don't I? I mean maybe this lack of editing, or maybe I mean this poor time management. But you won't know which one I mean until I tell you. And this is a situation that we see a lot. When we speak together like this, because we have the hand movements and the eye movements, we know what we mean, and it's okay. But somebody is reading my writing. They don't have me there to be like, oh, yes, this is what I mean. This is the element that I'm grabbing. This aspect of the work is what I'm talking about. So if you see a this, a these, or a those at the beginning of a sentence, stop. Is it clear what you mean? And if not, add a noun or a noun phrase. And if you find you are actually repeating the entire of the previous sentence, it means your sentences are the wrong way around. Flip them around. So you say, instead of saying A, this means that B, say B because A. Flip it around. That's subjects. Pronouns. After the research group finished its article, it underwent review. Where's the ambiguity here? Which word here? It, exactly, everybody. It is ambiguous. It's ambiguous because I have the word research group and the word article, and both of them are singular nouns, so that it could refer to either of them. So do I mean after the research group finished its article, the article underwent review, or do I mean the group underwent review? I need to say it. It might get really clunky and I might need to rephrase the sentence then, but that's better than leaving it ambiguous. I could also do things like saying after the researchers finished their article, it underwent review, and now it's obvious because there's one plural noun, researchers, and their, and one singular noun, article and it. So if you spot any pronouns, it, they, them, he, or she, check upstream in the sentence. If it's not completely clear which noun it is referring to, actually state the noun, and then reword if it sounds a bit clunky to your ear. So that's pronouns. Comparisons. We see this one a lot. Participants aged 16 through 25 years showed a greater improvement in spatial reasoning at 6-week follow-up. Where's the ambiguity? Where's the ambiguity? What's the ambiguous word here? Greater, saying Ada and Gabby and Karen and Ahmed, greater than what? Yeah, greater than what? Do I mean than all of the other groups, the year groups? Or do I mean than a particular year group? Or do I mean than all of the other follow-up times? What do I mean? So if you see yourself doing a greater or a lesser or compared, ask yourself than who? And if it's not completely obvious because you haven't just been talking about that comparison or you only have two groups in your entire study, add a comparator and make it clear. Burkle, wouldn't fear of being ambiguous lead to repetition and at times take up more words? Yes, excellent point. We have a tension between this, between trying to be simple and trying to be clear. And there is always going to be a tension. What I would say to you is first fix the ambiguity. First add in the extra information and then look at the sentence and go, okay, now I've got repetition. Do I need to rephrase the sentence to remove the repetition, but still keep it clear? And there's usually some things we can do to move things around. So I'm not repeating the same phrases, but I'm still clear. But start by removing the ambiguity and then edit it to make it clearer, to make it simpler, get rid of words. That's usually the good way around of doing it. Last one, clear verbs. So this one's a bit of a sort of in between simplicity and clarity. But after conducting an investigation of pain after knee surgery, we came to the conclusion that physiotherapy reduced pain. The verbs in this sentence are conducting and came. But I didn't actually conduct and come, didn't I? Did I? Right? That's not what they did. They conducted an investigation and came to a conclusion. So what are the real verbs? What are the real verbs I should have used? Ivan, we are sharing handouts. So there'll be all of this information in handouts that you can actually use. So what are the verbs? What are the verbs? Who can spot a verb for me from those two bits? Conducting an investigation, what's the actual verb? So Samira is saying investigation. Cherie, yes, investigate, yes. Take that investigation and turn it into investigate, investigating. And we came to the conclusion, what's the real verb there? Conclude, exactly. And I have saved 2 words every time, right? Isn't that fantastic? This little funny thing is called a nominalization, if anyone cares. It's when you take a verb, you turn it into a noun, and then you add a weaselly verb in front of it. So free the real verb. Find the real verb, use it, and save 2 words every time. And this links back to how do I deal with the word count? As you make things clearer, you will also kill off some random extra words. Fantastic. So let's put that into practice. We have the final sentence in our practice paragraph. Failure to achieve this resulted in the receipt of additional training. Oh, goodness. We've got failure to achieve this. It's got no subject. What is the subject of this sentence? We've got a floating this to achieve what? And we've got resulted in the receipt of. Okay. What could we do to fix this? This is really a lot of problems in one sentence. So here's what I would do. I would say sites that did not achieve this target received additional training. I've given the sentence a subject, sites. I've given the word this a noun, this target, and I've changed that would result in into received. Would result in the receipt of just becomes received. And that whole sentence is shorter and actually understandable. But when I start saying things like this target, I'll look upstream. Maybe I could do this a bit better. The target is mentioned in the first sentence. They aimed to initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1-month period. So what about if I replace this target with the actual target? Sites that did not initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1-month period received additional training. But that's just the entire previous sentence. So aimed to was another weasel coming from the protocol. When you see an aimed to in your method section, check. Is it actually an aim to, or what did you actually do? We can get rid of that whole sentence. And now we've got sites that did not initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1-month period received additional training. So step by step, as we remove the ambiguity, we're also shortening it down. So those two things will balance out as we keep going. And what I hope it's showing you is that we don't get it right first time. Step by step, we're slowly improving and getting things better and easier for our readers. So that's clarity. Last little bit is thinking about simple language. Does anybody else feel like this? That if you don't use complicated language, people will underestimate your work? Is that something that you've ever been told by a supervisor or that you've worried about? Samira is saying no, excellent. I know some folks do really worry about this, that if they sound too simple, people will judge their work as being too simple. And it's a real worry. And a lot of folks get told by their supervisors, use fancy language so that you sound fancy too. You must sound formal, right? Yes, Le Bouteille. Thing is, your work's already awesome. The research you're doing is complicated. The thoughts you had to have to design your study and do it were complicated, interesting thoughts. Your work is already fantastic. It doesn't need extra fancy language squashed on top of it. That just means people trying to read it are having to be like, I can't get to the work, right? Remember, the vast majority of the people reading and writing science are reading and writing it in their second, third, fourth, fifth language. Also, they're really busy people running around being clinicians and stuff. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to access our work. We want to make it as easy as possible for ourselves to write it as well. So Faith saying yes, especially if your first language is not English. Okay, doesn't need to do it. Take a moment. Think about the key words in your field. And if you want to write them into the chat, you can, or just write them down on a piece of paper for yourself. What are the key words in your field that you would have to use? So for instance, for my PhD, I used words like Rhodobacter sporoides, methyl-accepting chemotaxis proteins, methyl esterases, methyl transferases, flagellum motor, and phosphokinase cascade. Those are really complicated, enormous words, right? Karen's got multi-morbidity in there. Jeepers, how many syllables is that thing, right? We already have to use very complicated language to describe our work. The actual vocabulary of our field is already complicated. We don't have to add any extra complicated words around it because our actual arguments are complicated enough already. Julie's got community-based peer support, huge long phrase. We've been told this is not a newspaper article. Ooh, whoever said that to you and I would have conversations because newspaper articles are really good at getting information across to the people reading it. I feel like that's possibly a good thing. I mean, we don't want to spin, and newspaper articles do that. But if you're communicating as clearly as a newspaper article, I think you're doing well. So, things that you can think about. Phrases like prior to. What could you use instead? Before, exactly, right? In order to. What would you use? To. In comparison with. Compared to, yes, or than. No one uses the word than in science. I don't know why. It's a fantastic little word. In conjunction with. What could you use? Just with. So you see, this is where we start to reduce our word count and we're reducing our complexity. And we don't need these words because we already have to use all those other complicated words that you've all got written down on pieces of paper in front of you. And you're like, whoo, Narcissus, for the purpose of wonderful. Just 4, 2, fantastic. There's also simple words, right? Why are we all utilizing things when we can just use them? Why are we all administering things? What would you use instead? Give, yes, right? Exacerbate. What would you do instead? Exacerbate, horrible one. Ada, exactly. Worsen. Ameliorate. This is one that I always have to have a moment of like, improve. Yeah, what does it mean? Terminate. Stop or end. Quite correct. These are really large words. But the thing is, we already are using really large words. And if any of you are ever writing a conference abstract, this is how you save on those character counts for your grant applications and your conference abstracts, these words. Leave the characters and the words for the complicated ideas and words you have to use. So really quickly, because I'm aware of time, if we go back to our fantastic paragraph, there are some problem places and I've highlighted them up. Each of the 5 sites then commenced recruitment. Completely unnecessary, each of the 5 sites, just the 5 sites. We don't need each of the 5 sites. How about that commenced? What would you change commenced to? Yep, began or start. We've got initiate, so we could do the other one you've all mentioned, start. How about within that a 1 month period? A 1 month period. Necessary. What could you do instead? A month, 1 month, right? We're saving words. It's great. Additional training. Ada, more, exactly. And with all of these things, once we've done all of that, we might go, actually, I don't want to say more. I want to actually give some proper detail. I want to say something like another 2-hour training session. Because when I've removed all of that extra complexity, I give myself space to give extra detail about my study, which is much more useful for the people reading it. So this is what we've ended up with. Remember, we started here. Once the study nurses had been trained, each of the 5 sites commenced recruitment and aimed to initiate the protocol in their first patient within a 1 month period where failure to achieve this would result in the receipt of additional training. We've ended up at the trial team trained the study nurses. The 5 sites then began recruitment. Sites that did not start the protocol in their first patient within 1 month received another 2-hour training session. Better? Saved 9 words and we added in a bunch of information. So it's just something, this is not the only way to edit. This is not the only way to write. But I think it's something to think about as you're going through, that this doesn't sound informal. It doesn't sound like a newspaper. It lets us have the space to put the detail that we need to put in. And it makes it that little bit more accessible to our readers who are from all the way around the world and all want to join in with our science. Cyril, I love it. This is amazingly amazing, but I know that's ambiguous. Fantastic. So I'm conscious that we need some time for questions. So we talked about completeness, clarity, language, and simplicity. So your questions about article style. Right, Boutle is saying, when would you recommend editing your copy? Excellent question. I like to recommend to people that they write their whole first draft of their article or of like a section of the article, and then they put it away for at least 24 hours, preferably longer, and then they come back and edit. Try and separate the process of writing and editing. Writing is generating new text. Editing is a separate process, a separate task. One, because if you allow yourself to edit when you're supposed to be writing, you will never generate new words. I'm terrible. I will just keep editing the same paragraph over and over and over and over and never write another new word. And 2, because when you edit, you want to have fresh eyes. You want to read what you actually wrote and not what you think you wrote. I don't know if anyone's ever tried this. Pick up a piece of writing that you did like last year and read it. It's really interesting. You will find all of these mistakes. You'll find all of these odd little typos. And what was I thinking? It's because when you edited it a year ago, because you did, you read it and you edited it, you were reading what you expected to read. You were reading what you thought you'd written, not what you actually wrote. So try and give yourself clean brain, clean eyes, at least 24 hours. That helps a lot. And if you're one of those people who goes, oh, but I can't stop editing while I write, font size 3 does help. You can't see what you're writing. Just keep typing. Which was a piece of advice I heard from Hugh Kearns, who I really like for that sort of advice, if you're looking for somebody to follow on Twitter. Any other questions? Dilakshi, yes. Is it acceptable to use first-person pronouns I and we in academic writing? It is positively encouraged these days. You will still find the odd old-fashioned journal that wants you to use passive voice. That's one of the reasons people use passive voice, is to not use I and we. Those of you who are doing a PhD, for instance, in your thesis, please feel encouraged to use the word I in your thesis. You did the work, stand behind your work. But yeah, the I and we in academic writing, completely fine. And it's one of the reasons people try and end up with passive voice, is they're trying to avoid that, but it is worth playing around with. You don't have to use I and we, but feel like you can if you want to. Check your journal's instructions for authors though, because there are certain journals that don't want you to use I and we in the abstract, bizarrely. Fabulous. There's some really lovely feedback that folks are finding this helpful, which I'm very excited about. And for those who are asking about recordings, this recording will be shared as far as I am aware. And the resource document, I am not sure. I will chat to Andy and Tabitha from AuthorAid. It's the best way to get that to you, but there will be a Word document with everything that we've talked about today, nice and easy for you to use. Fantastic. Okay, so before we stop, because I can see there's no more questions coming through, we've just spent an hour and a half together. That's a lot of time. So this is a Friday afternoon, so I'm not going to force you to do this for today, but one next step. So not what you're going to do with this information like this afternoon, on Monday when you come back to work, but how are you going to use what we've talked about today? What is one concrete next step that you are going to take with what we have talked about today? Karen is saying, I'm about to edit a manuscript I wrote 2 weeks ago, so this is very timely, excellent. So hopefully that's your next step. So folks want to share some step. Yeah, Cyril's saying, I think using sophistication mixed with simplicity will be good for the scientific community. Completely agree. Addie is going to go and read my work again. Lovely. It's a good next step. Oh, Totek's got 2 papers to review. Good luck. Excellent. Any other next steps that folks would like to share? Salmon's working on a grant next week. Good luck. Asima's writing a protocol. Fantastic. Good luck with that. Lizzie Ismail is going to finish up writing. Yep. Catherine's going to write an abstract. Great. So folks have got some actual writing tasks to jump onto with this information, which is really exciting to see. Faith's writing a protocol paper. Oh, excellent. Good luck, everybody. And Dilakashi is working on a research proposal. Shree's writing a paper. Amazing. You guys have got so many fantastic pieces of writing to do. Gabby writing a PhD thesis soon. Good luck. And looking to write a review paper. Fantastic. Oh, and we've got a question from Boutle. How would you recommend moving into academic writing? Any journals you'd recommend? Oh, I'm not sure I totally understand your question. So academic writing would be what I would refer to as the writing that you do to share your scientific research with the scientific research community. So writing for journal articles, for journals. If what you mean is actually getting involved in the publishing industry as sort of an associate or managing editor, the way you sort of can get your way into that is by peer reviewing. So once you've published, people will start asking you to peer review. And as you peer review, that's a really good way to start getting into a community and then maybe get invited to be an associate editor. And then that's how you start building your way up. From there, you might get invited to be an editor. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me for this hour and a half. Thank you so much to AuthorAid for the invitation. This has been fantastic. I hope that reporting guidelines become a crucial part of your writing process. They are there to help you. And for those of you who are starting your writing, I really encourage you to grab the reporting guideline when you are planning the paper, because that will help you get all your headings in, then you won't have to add the stuff later. But that's something that can really help. So yeah, I will stop sharing my slides. And if there are already other questions, yeah, sorry.
Yes. Do keep putting questions in the chat if you have them. Thank you so much, Jen, for a great session. This was so informative, and I loved the interactive aspect of it. I think it worked really well in the chat, and thank you everyone also for participating and giving your input and taking part in this. I think, you know, doing the little exercises helps everyone actually internalize the information. We'll be sharing the recording as we said at the beginning, and Jen will also be sharing a handout. So for those of you in the MOOC, you will find the recording in the Zoom link, and we'll also, you know, we'll link you to it again. If you received an email to be invited to the session, we'll contact you via email, so you'll be able to get the resources. Yes, I think that's everything. We'll close the session here. Once again, thank you everyone for joining on this Friday afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope you have a lot of takeaways from Jen's great session.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being as interactive as you've all been. It's been a really great session, really fun to hang out with you all. And good luck with all of your writing jobs.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you, Haley, for joining us as well.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.